Hi, welcome to Azure Community Live, an online meetup about Azure for the community, created by the community. I'm your host, Esteban Garcia. The idea behind this online meetup is that anyone, anywhere with an internet connection can be part of the Azure community. I live in Orlando, Florida, and although we have a lot of meetups in the area, at this moment, most of the people are staying home and there's no live meetups. So this is an opportunity for us to get together online and come together as a community and share our knowledge and give feedback. I hope that all of you are staying healthy and safe and that this meetup provides you with a way to stay connected with the community. And speaking of giving back, if you want to share your passion for Azure at whatever level, get in touch with us on YouTube, on Twitter, or go to our call for speakers. It can be on anything, Azure, any level, totally up to you. So let me get to the speaker for this event. Josh Garverick is a cloud solution architect at Tenant Magnitude. He's a Microsoft MVP, a seasoned IT professional with more than 15 years of enterprise experience, specializes in application lifecycle management in DevOps and Azure. Josh, tell us a little bit more about
Yeah, for
yourself.
sure. So I am in sunny Buffalo, New York, which, as you may or may not know, the weather is always changing and always crazy. And it was snowing this morning, which was completely weird, but it melted, so we're good. From a professional perspective, I've been in lots of different verticals. So I've done everything from healthcare to finance to logistics and transportation and retail, and also obviously doing stuff with consulting now. So lots of different places to get myself into a little bit of trouble and learn lots of things. So it's been a good time.
I can imagine. So, Josh, today's topic around Windows Virtual Desktop is of big interest to people. I mean, a lot of people have moved to working from home model. So tell us a little bit about that, and then I'll turn this over
Yeah,
to
for
you.
sure. So Windows Virtual Desktop is one of several different types of VDI offerings, virtual desktop interface offerings that are out there. Windows Virtual Desktop being native to Azure, of course, and with a lot of the shelter in place and quarantine activities that have been going on over the past few weeks, this has become more and more of an ask from customers that we deal with, and I'm sure that as well as yourself and others who are out in the field. It's a matter of, well, we have people who normally would go into an office that have a PC at the office. They don't have access to a laptop. We still want to make sure that they're able to get in and do what they need to do so that they feel productive and don't miss out as much of the normal day-to-day stuff that this whole situation we're in right now with COVID kind of takes away from you. So it's been a lot of what we've seen coming in recently is requests to really beef that up and do it quickly too, which is, it's not always an easy task to do anything fast,
Yeah.
right? So the nice thing with Windows Virtual Desktop is that the setup for the initial setup is really quick. You can provision what's known as a host pool within a couple of minutes, and that's one of the things that we're going to kind of walk through today is how to do that.
Okay, great. Yeah. I've definitely have seen an uptick on that, and you're right. As you know, we're going into a new world of the way that we work and the way that we collaborate, and leveraging Azure and leveraging tools such as this to be able to make it just a little bit easier for us to be able to do our work is great.
Yeah.
So, Josh, I want to keep an eye on the comments on the channel. So if any of you out there have any questions, at the end we'll set some time aside for any Q&A. But with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Josh and show us all the good
All
stuff.
right. So bear in mind this is a live demo, so who knows what'll happen. Let me start by sharing my screen. Hopefully you can see that. So to get yourself familiarized with the offering and to get started, the best place to go is to the Azure documentation pages and check out Virtual Desktop. There are a lot of different things in here, so it gives you the ability to do things like multi-sessions. You can have multiple people logged onto the same back-end machine with no noticeable interference to the user themselves, which is nice. It also keeps your costs down a bit when you're trying to create a pool of machines or resources. So you're not creating one per person. you can batch them, and you can do multi-session on several, which will keep your runtime cost a little bit lower. It gives you the ability to run Office Pro Plus. So if you have Office installations and licenses for Office in any capacity, you can either expose them through the virtual desktop directly, or you can expose them as applications, and they will launch separate from the desktop, which is kind of neat too. You can do that with several different types of applications. I won't say every single app that you would install on Windows is able to be exposed in that manner, but the essentials are definitely out there. So if folks are using Office installations and not Office 365 or Microsoft 365, I think is known today. I think that was something recently that changed. This gives you an opportunity to expose those applications to people and let them do their work. So it's pretty sweet. When they say deploy and scale in minutes, they're not kidding. It's really, really easy to set up and get moving. One caveat I will put out there is that anytime you run into a situation with enterprise setups where you have lots of different virtual networks and most likely firewalls, do some initial testing, obviously, before you decide to launch it out to the masses. But I've done this for at least one client already, where we set up a test bed and had it internally on their network, private peering and all that stuff. And they were able to actually use that desktop and then access things, that corresponded to their level of access with Active Directory. So it's pretty nice to be able to do that without having to go through tons of networking and security things. Like, everything is stitched together pretty well. So that's definitely a plus. One thing that we'll take a look at now is how you can actually provision one. Now, in a lot of cases, people don't necessarily always like demos from the portal. They want to see how you can script it and make it, ready for your DevOps pipeline and all that stuff. Given this, in the context of what we're doing today, I'm just going to show you quickly how you can get that pool set up and ready to go. You can obviously reverse engineer the ARM template out of this and use that in any kind of a pipeline that you want to use. That's actually what I did. Was I took the template back, scrubbed out the default network settings, put in the stuff that was tying it to the private peered VNets, so that way I could use that going forward in a pipeline and provision host pools regionally for different targets, depending on who needed to have access. So let's jump into this guy, and we're going to use my MVP subscription, and we're going to call this RG.WVD pool. Just toss it somewhere. Yeah, East US is fine. And this is going to be host pool 1. So here you have the option to choose between pooled or personal. And again, if you have folks who are doing lower impact stuff, more likely not development work, shall we say, you can go with a pooled resource. If you're going to have folks who need to log in and have a little bit more horsepower, if you want to run Visual Studio, or you need to do anything else that's more CPU memory intensive and things like that, you might want to consider creating a pool that has personal access instead. And then it'll give you the chance here to enter how many desktop users you have. So if you were to create a pool of machines at a personal level, for 50 people, it's going to create 50 VMs. Obviously, compute costs are going to be tied to whatever you create. So if you do pooled, Your default desktop users, as you can see here, are valid email addresses. You can leave this blank to not have any default desktop users and then configure that on the back end. That gets into some of the slightly more snarly bits with setting up, who has access to the RDS stuff and exposing that as available through your enterprise applications, which I'll show you how you can do that too. So we're going to leave this blank for now. We're going to leave this at pooled, and then we're going to go over to virtual machines. Creating an availability set is always a good idea, so you can leave that on. You have the option to go between different profiles. So if you do a heavy, you get 13 D4S. This doesn't even give you a number, an AN. Or you can go custom and you can change it out and put in whatever you'd like. Now, for this example, let's say that we'll do 3 with medium use. And the VM prefix we'll just call WVD. That's totally fine. And what that's going to do is, in the back end, it uses a copy index to go through and create these machines for you. So basically what you're putting in there is the precursor to the number for your virtual machine name. And if I want to come in here and change size, I can totally do that. And let's go with a B4 because it's a little cheaper. Good stuff. Image source. You can, if you have managed images, if you have something like in the shared image gallery, a gold image maybe that has more stringent guidelines, certain antivirus and asset management software installed, things like that, can totally do that. You can pull it from Blob if you have a VHD somewhere that you want to use, or you can use the gallery. The image that you can pick from is either 2016 or 3 different flavors of Windows 10. It's not going to, so if you have folks who are using Linux or anything like that, not going to be able to do that through this interface. We can leave this at multi-session with Office Pro Plus, Premium SSD. If you've got, then this is the thing that you want to make sure that you're paying attention to when you're joining these machines to a domain, because the intent is obviously to have this somewhere hooked into your network so that it can register itself on the domain and leverage Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, depending on how you have things set up, to be able to take care of allowing access and validating user credentials and stuff like that. You can specify the OU as well if you really want to get granular. So for example, if you have a full distinguished name bucket for your machines, a lot of larger organizations will follow that practice where they have specific sets of servers, maybe by region, maybe by team or application type, things like that. You can absolutely put that in for that. You can either create a new VNet, and in this case, obviously, we have no VNets in this resource group. If you have any existing, they'll show up here, and that's where you can get into filtering it by specific VNets that are within the private peering arena that you have going on. The subnet is also something that's going to be required. You have to kind of cordon it off from the rest of things. So you want to make sure that you've got a decent sized subnet in there for the machines that you've got and the machines that you want to create. So unfortunately, I don't have a domain controller on any VNet here. So that's probably not going to work too well, which is unfortunate. But I'm going to jump to the next screen just to kind of walk you through that anyways. And some of this stuff I learned the hard way. Some of this stuff you don't want to mess with. For example, tenant group name, don't mess with it. Just leave it be. It'll confuse things later on when you're trying to do deeper configuration. Your WVD tenant name can be whatever you want to call this. This one, we can just say host pool 1. Who's the RDS owner? Remote Desktop Services. For those not playing the acronym game, that's what RDS is representing here. So you can pick UPN or you can pick Service Principal, and that would be an Azure Service Principal. If you've got something set up for that, totally fine. If not, pick the UPN, user principal name, of the person that would have the ability to do administrative things on the back end. So one other thing to note too, with setting the stuff up, you can actually get 2FA and MFA enabled access to these resources as well, which is pretty nice, especially most companies using either 2FA or MFA to ensure that any authentication is appropriate and intentional. So if you're going to use MFA, you're going to want to make sure that you create a service principal as opposed to using someone's UPN as the main management vehicle there. So that's kind of a walkthrough on the different options that you have when doing this through the portal. And once you go to create this, you can actually watch the deployment go like you would normally. Anytime you deploy anything in Azure, you can kind of watch the deployment head off. And the end result is something that allows you to go into a web portal, or there's a special desktop client that you can download as well. So if someone has a Windows machine at home, they can download that special remote desktop client, and that will allow them to connect directly to the Windows Virtual Desktop instance that's been set up. If they don't, you can still access it from any HTML5 enabled browser. So if you've got an iPad, if you've got an Android tablet, if you've got a lower powered machine that you don't necessarily want to install remote desktop on, you can still use the web interface and go that route to be able to pick that up. So all good stuff. I'm going to flip back.
Hey Josh, question here. So once you do that, how long does it typically take?
Yes, but I think you're on mute.
I am on mute. There you go.
Yeah, no worries.
So once you get to that point, how long does it usually take to get, like, okay, you went through all those steps. Mm-hmm. Is it based on the number of virtual desktops that you're creating? Is it based on the number of VMs that's like, how do you know? How do you size like how long it's going to take once you say, okay, go until?
Yeah, and that's a great question. It's totally dependent on the number of resources that you're trying to provision, right? So if you're doing a small set, let's say 3 to 5 machines, because you've got a small user base, that's maybe 10 minutes ish, give or take. If you're looking at more, obviously it's going to have to crank through that copy index to 100 or however many you're going to put out there. And then each one of those, while executing in parallel, is still going to take some time. So you might be looking, a little bit north of a half an hour or more, depending on how much you have going.
That's still pretty good to be able to get your entire workforce up and running. There's no hardware, there's no things that you need to worry about. So that's great. I mean, it's still saving tons of time. I know that I've been part of deployments of this in the past in a regular data center, and we're talking weeks or days, or at least weeks to get.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Especially if you have to rack and stack and stuff like that, and actually do the wiring and everything. I forget about it. That's a big project, but this takes a lot of that legwork out for you, which is very nice.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
So next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk a little bit of how to connect with the web client. And I'm going to head back over to the docs site. And as I mentioned before, you can obviously use pretty much any type of device that's got an HTML5 capable browser. Um, it supports Edge and Internet Explorer. We'll just forget about that second one I mentioned. My preferences lie elsewhere. But Safari, Firefox, and Chrome. So your major browser players in the market are definitely out there. Gives you a link that you can access. And when you pull this up, it's going to ask you to authenticate. And it's going to yell at you if you don't exist. So apparently I don't exist. And that's that. A lot of times you're going to have to go into kind of the back end of things to configure whether or not there's a subscription available, whether or not you can expose certain applications and stuff like that. And in order to do that, you want to do a couple of different things. So first, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to go to Azure Active Directory. And under Enterprise Applications, I believe we should have all virtual. It may actually have to be installed first before you'll see it, but basically what will happen is you're going to have two things that are going to show up in here. You're going to have one for virtual desktop users, and then you're going to have one for remote application users. And you want to make sure that both of those are enabled for your organization, and that you actually put the folks in there who need to have access to it. Now, one thing that I'm not sure if there's anything on the roadmap for this or not, but currently when you go to add users, you have to do them individually. There's no option to put in a group that's either AD or Azure AD based. You have to do UPNs for every single person, which if you've got a small amount of people that need it, that's totally fine. You just put in your UPNs and away you go. If you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of people, that's no bueno. That's not fun, right? I mean, that's a lot of stuff to have to manually add in there. Even if you script it, it's still a pain. It's much better to use groups whenever you can, and that's kind of one thing that I'd like to see. You know, if it's not on the roadmap, I'd love to see that on the roadmap, because that would make, especially in enterprise situations, the administration of this from a regional and group-based perspective a whole lot easier to deal with. Just from a straight access control perspective, it would just make things so much easier. So that's kind of the goods with that. When you go in and you do look to publish applications, this is honestly the best way I've found to do this, is to just make sure that you've got the PowerShell library stuff installed for Windows Virtual Desktop. There's a way to actually get that installed as a module. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to do a new RDS remote app. And you can see some of these placeholders in here. So the tenant name is going to be that default tenant name that I told you not to change, so don't mess with it. The host pool name obviously is the name of the host pool that you're targeting, and your app group name is essentially one of two things. You can create more app groups if you want to. For the sake of simplicity, it's easier to deal with the two that are kind of built in, which is remote applications and desktop applications. So when you're looking to publish a new RDS remote app, you want to make sure that you're using that remote applications app group. And that'll give you the ability to go in and not only look at what's in that app group for exposure, but then it will allow you to put that name in there and then give it a friendly name. The friendly name is what's going to show up on that web portal or in the WVD desktop client if you're using the client software itself. And then, it just gives you the ability to put it in a file path to be able to pull that up. And that's what we'll launch when someone goes into that web interface and clicks on, Excel or PowerPoint or, anything that you're able to expose in that manner. And as you go through here, it gives you a little bit more detail, a little different for Edge. It is what it is. For the most part, if you're using other browsers, it's totally, you can use this top example. Otherwise, you might want to make sure that you follow the instructions for this. It gives you the ability to customize feeds. So it's going to walk you through, and I had to find this out the hard way as well, that even though you may only take a few minutes to deploy that Windows Virtual Desktop through the portal, there's still some stuff you got to do in the back end to be able to get it to work appropriately. And this whole section in the doc site is perfect for that, because it gives you all the different accounts, or all the different commands rather, that you're going to need to be able to run and enable this stuff. And that there's a PowerShell module right there. So first, make sure that you have that downloaded, whether that's on a jump box, whether that's on a workstation somewhere, or whether that's in Cloud Shell. You can do this in Cloud Shell too. This gives you the ability to add the account. So this is the deployment URL that you're going to be dealing with. Then you can do get RDS remote app, and that's going to give you, the ability to go through and pull this back. So app group name, this is a custom app group name. Host pool name obviously is a custom one, and then the tenant is whatever you want to set that up as. So you can see app group name here that's highlighted as desktop application group. And then if you want to change that over to a specific, alias for whatever you want to call it, then you can use, set RDS remote desktop, and that will allow you to change that into something that's a bit more meaningful for you. So you're not just dealing with defaults. And then obviously you have jumpers. Yes.
So Josh, sorry. Once you get to a point once you set up, you configure these things. These new virtual desktops, they have all the access to all the things that the people would have had. Like how do you get to that point to connect?
Yeah, so that's a great question. When you're deploying this and you're associating it with a virtual network that's currently in your Azure subscription that has that private peering back to, your express routes, your on-prem networks, and all that stuff, that's the importance of having the Active Directory domain to join when we were first doing the setup, because it's going to join the domain, which allows it to then propagate and find those resources. So if you have mapped drives, if you have specific things that are set up for user login scripts, it's going to be able to find that stuff for you. So if you go to log into one of these machines and you've got a setup script that runs when you log in that pulls in 5 map drives, all of that's going to show up, and all of that's going to have access to what you need, which is all controlled through AD, which is really, really slick. You can do other stuff with like Azure Files, for example. I know that I've seen some things where you might run into some problems with using Azure Files versus a traditional setup that you might have existing where people log onto their machine and it just hits a server in your data center or something like that. That's not to say that you won't have some latency, because you might, right? Because it's got to hop a few times before it gets back to your data center. It's got to go through your express route provider and all of that good stuff. So you might see some latency there, but at the end of the day, you still have the access, and that's really what's more important.
Okay,
You're welcome.
Sense. Thanks.
So that's the really high level, really nitty, really 30,000 foot view of how you can do that. My advice to anyone who wants to go this route is, if you're feeling adventurous, after you deploy the host pool, go through the docs and check that out. Obviously, you can reach out to folks such as us to help with things like that too. So there's certainly no shame in that. depending on the complexity of your setup and how many people you have to enable, I mean, obviously that could go very quickly, or that could take some time depending on, how much discovery you have to do to make sure that everything is appropriately set up. But um, the first one of these that I did, this is how I did it. I followed the docs. And I experimented a little bit, and I figured out, okay, well, I have to, run these commands in this specific order. I have to make sure that the enterprise app is enabled for the organization at the Azure Active Directory tenant level, and that will tie together your auth structure for you.
That's great. There is one question here related to what you were just talking about. So, does a user need to be an owner to be able to create a host pool, or can a contributor do that as well?
That's a fantastic question. Um, as far as I know, contributor and owner, either one should be able to do this. You might run into problems if you don't have network contributor on the resource, the actual VNet that you need to join to. So that could trip you up a little bit. I know I've seen that come up before, where people are even just trying to, deal with creating VMs. If they don't have network contributor, at least on the network, on the VNet, they're not going to be able to do anything. So it may be one of those things where you need to branch out those ACLs a little bit and make sure that the right roles are assigned. But for the most part, that should work. You shouldn't have any issue with that.
Great. Well, that's awesome. I think that was the last question that I had. Unless you had something else you wanted to share with everyone, but this is great. I think this is the type of these are the type of things that allows us to really collaborate and work together and leverage the power of the cloud, leverage the power of Azure. We're all living in a
I
whole new
know.
world now, and being able to take advantage of these tools relatively easy. I mean, in the sense that it doesn't take millions of dollars of hardware and lots of time. Obviously, the need an expert like you to be able to do this, but to be able to take advantage of these type of technologies to bring us closer together, get us back to working the way we kind of used to is
Absolutely.
amazing.
Absolutely. And that's, I'm continually amazed by the amount of things that get exposed, in the industry in general, but specifically for Azure too, because it's an ever-changing ecosystem, and the ability to tap into all this stuff almost at a whim is really empowering, and kind of freaks me out at the same time, depending on what I'm working on. But with great power comes great responsibility. So, you know,
Yeah. Are, Are there any big limitations that we should, like, people should know about, like right away? Like, if this is, I think you mentioned the Linux side earlier. Like, are there other things that people should be thinking about even before they get started?
I would definitely want to at least look at this through the lens of capacity planning, right? So, how
Yeah.
much space do you have in your VNet? Do you have the bandwidth to be able to support this on your express route rails? Because if you've got like a
Hmm.
lower sized connection, that type of saturation might screw you up some. But if you've got a bigger connection, if you've got one of the higher end connections, chances are pretty good you're not going to see any issues with connectivity or anything like that. But that's the biggest thing. Core quotas as well. So if your subscription is kind of capping at your quotas, or getting close to it, you want to be careful of that too. So you want to make sure that you're kind of checking in through the subscription blade, and looking at your quotas for your resources, and making sure you have enough for the series of VMs that you're going to be putting out there. Um, Making sure that obviously your domain can be easily joined, that you have the appropriate creds to join that domain, and
Hmm.
and also that you don't have any super strict, I say super strict, like zero connectivity type of NSGs or firewall rules that are out there. um, you want to make sure that that's got some opening, and pretty much all you need is the internet 80 and 443. It's you shouldn't have to have a bunch of crazy port openings for allowing this to go through. And like I said, the authentication and authorization stuff is all controlled through Azure AD. And if you want to add 2FA or MFA in there, that gives you a little additional peace of mind to make sure that things are appropriately locked down. So
All right. That's great. Well, I really appreciate your time, Josh. I hope that everything is going well up there in Buffalo, and if I'm assuming that if anyone has any additional questions, they can reach out to you over Twitter. Your Twitter handle
Yep,
is right there.
absolutely.
And again, it's great to be able to bring the community together here. And Josh, thank you for making the time, and thanks for everyone who tuned in. We'll have these videos like every other video that we've had posted up on our YouTube channel. So keep an eye and take a look at all the other 11 ones that we've done. We have more coming next week. So keep following us and keep coming back to Azure Community Live. Thank you, Josh, and thanks everyone for
Thanks for
tuning
having
in.
me. It was a pleasure.